Hey everyone, this is Pallavi and today I'm going to show the ninth game of the book Chess the Art of Logical Thinking by Neil MacDonald. This game was played between Adams and Benjamin in New York in 1996 and the opening played was Sicilian Defence. Let's start. So I started with e4 occupying the center, freeing the queen and the bishop and controlling the d5 and f5 square. Black played c5, the opening. This opening, the Sicilian Defence, is one of the most popular openings. Black's first move covers the d4 square and prevents white from having two pawns in the center. If white insists on d4, then black can reply with c takes d4 and exchanging white's central pawn for a less central one. It also establishes a diagonal route for the queen, and the c file might be useful for a future attack on the queen side. White played knight f3, developing towards the center because a knight on the rim is dim, supporting the d4 square as well so that white can push the d2 pawn to d4 with knight support. e6. In good Sicilian style, black fights for the d5 square, opens up the e7 square for his pieces and clears a diagonal for his king's bishop. c3. Rather than activating his knight after d4, cd4, knight d4, and then knight c3, white chooses to develop a pawn center. This is a smart move since having pawns on d4 and e4 puts continuous positional pressure on black. The only drawback is that the pawn on c3 limits the queen's knight's preferred opening square. So after c3, now black played knight f6. Developing and targeting the e4 pawn becomes a logical choice for black given the absence of his usual protector, the knight on c3. After knight f6, white played e5. White neutralizes the threat and gains time by counter-attacking the knight. However, not maintaining the pawns on both d4 and e4 limits the flexibility of his center. Knight d5. Black seizes the opportunity presented by white's commitment to e5, promptly placing the knight in the opening on d5. Now white played d4. All according to plan, white supports the pawn on e5 and at the same time opens lines for his pieces. And then black played c takes d4, a necessary exchange as otherwise the white pawns might roll forwards with c6 with c4 and then followed by d4 if if black did not capture the pawn on d4. So white can play c4 and then d5. So that's why black captured. C takes d4, the only sensible recapture, as the whole point of white's opening strategy has been to maintain a pawn presence on d4. b6. As the way out of e6 is blocked, black sees another method of development for his light squared bishop. Bishop c4. White's light squared bishop faces no issues. It can be easily and aggressively developed by attacking the knight. Bishop a6. Black decides to challenge white's bishop rather than play bishop b7 when castle, bishop e7, bishop takes d5, bishop takes d5, and then knight c3 attacking the bishop, and then bishop goes to b7, or else white doubles black's pawns with knight takes d5 and then e takes d5. So bishop b7 and then d5, which is a good move for white, gives white the initiative in the center. So that's why black played bishop to a6. White played bishop takes a6. It was also possible to inflict doubled pawns with bishop takes d5, then e takes d5, but they are difficult to attack. For example, if knight c3, then bishop b4, and then bishop takes c3 check. Furthermore, white would be unable to castle due to the bishop on a6 controlling the f1 square. Therefore, Adams prefers to simply exchange bishops. Knight takes a6. The knight has been forced by the transaction onto the inferior a6 square. It will be difficult for black to find a suitable role for his piece, for this piece in any future plan. White castled. After resolving the situation in the middle of the board as he wanted, Adams protects his king and moves his rook closer to the center. Bishop e7. Here the bishop is securely positioned and wards off any attacking ideas with knight g5. Knight b d2. The start of a strategic plan to capitalize on the only vulnerabilities in black's generally strong arrangement, the e4 square, and the space one knight's move away from it, the d6 square. Castle, king safety. Knight e4, a central square where a knight can stay safely, is always great. Here the white knight can only be challenged by moving the f7 pawn to f5, but this would make the black king side weaker. The black knight on d5 is also comfortably placed on a square where it can't be attacked by pawns. Knight a c7. On the other hand, this knight isn't needed much. There's only one really good square for the black knight and the other knight is already occupying it. Bishop g5. Black has control over the light squares on their side of the board, but the d6 square is only guarded by the bishop. This leads Adams to smartly suggest exchanging bishops. f6. Benjamin decides to keep his bishop, but now a slight weakness appears in his kingside structure. E takes f6. Now the situation shifts. White's powerful pawn on e5 disappears, giving more flexibility to the black pieces. Also, the weakness on the d6 square is no longer a big problem. However, how can black take back on f6 without causing problems for their position? Black played knight takes f6. Of black's four possible recaptures, this makes the most sense as it not only challenges the knight, the white knight on e4, but also clears the way for the neglected knight on a6 to reach the d5 square. Bishop takes f6. White can maintain control only by trading his bishop for the knight. It's crucial to recall that a strategically positioned knight in the center can often be more advantageous than a bishop. Additionally, white aims to maintain the balance in the position. And the sequence of exchanges with knight takes f6, then bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop, queen takes f6 creates a situation that seems favorable for black, enabling them to launch an attack along the f file. That's why after knight f6, white played bishop takes f6. Black played g takes f6. After bishop takes f6, the black bishop is merely looking at the d4 pawn and can't harm the white position. It's actually blocking the black queen, which wants to make a move from the f6 square to start a counter attack. So a move like rook c1, so move like rook c1 would maintain a small but lasting advantage for white from this file. That's why Benjamin opts to take back with the pawn. This move enhances his control over the e5 square, but makes his king side slightly vulnerable to attack. Now white played rook c1. Adams confidently seizes the open file, compelling his opponent into a significant strategic choice. d5. Black effectively pushes the white knight out of the center, although the knight on c7 won't have an active central square for the entire game. So instead, knight d5 might seem appropriate initially instead of d5, but knight c3, if after knight d5 then white can play knight c3, demonstrates the idea of shrewd exchanges. Following knight takes c3, knight d5, knight c3, knight takes c3, and then rook takes c3. White is prepared to break down the black center with the move d4 to d5. This forces the opponent to defend at least one highly vulnerable pawn. So after d5, white played knight g3. The knight sadly withdraws from its once secure central position, yet it's said to have a leading role in a kingside attack due to black's less than ideal reply. Queen d7. Describing this as a major error might seem strong, but Adams' exceptional moves that come next make it tough to find a good defense. Basically, black makes a small queen move to improve their position, but it costs them valuable time. After bishop d6, let's say white's next move in the game, what happened is knight h4, could be met with f5, attacking the h4 knight with the queen and controlling the g4 square. Then knight f3, moving the knight away. Then black can play f4. Yet white is having advantages. However, black could have had more counterplay. And after bishop d6, knight h4, bishop takes g3. White swaps the bishop for the which swaps the bishop for the knight. This would significantly lessen white's advantage because the knight on g3 becomes a strong attacker during the game. Also, if white blocks the g3 square with h takes a g3, a white rook won't be able to use it for launching an attack down the g file. So, black played queen d7. Better was to play bishop d6, knight h4, a shift away from the center. While newcomers often make aimless attacks or maneuvers on the sides, Adams places his knight on h4 with a center-focused mindset. He's preparing for his next move, f4, to enhance control over the e5 square. If f5, right now after knight h4, then knight f3, unexpectedly gaining the e5 square for his knight. Notably, piece moves can be undone, but pawn moves cannot. White can retract knight h4, while black cannot reverse the pawn push from f5 to back to f7. So after knight h4, black played bishop d6. A solid defensive move. Black activates his bishop, adds another defender to the knight, and clears the second rank. Rank so that his queen can move to the aid of his king. f4. What more could be asked from a pawn move? In one stroke, white threatens to ram black's center at some point with f4 to f5, prepares to bring the rook into the attack along the third rank, and with rook f3 and then rook g3, prevents black easing his game by exchanging pieces with bishop takes g3, since the f4 pawn is now blocking. So after f4, black played f5. White wouldn't have quickly gone for f4 to f5 even if black had played a calm move like king h8. However, this move would have loomed as a lasting danger over black's position after a set of preliminary moves like knight h5, then rook f3. In response, Benjamin opts to eliminate this threat right away and prepares his own strategic threat involving moves like knight to e8, then knight to f6, and then knight to e4. where the initially weak knight on e4 transforms into a powerful force. If the black knight reached e4, white would face significant difficulties in holding the game. Thus, immediate counteractions are necessary. So f5, now white played knight h5. Once again, Adams directs a knight toward the edge, focusing on the center. The effectiveness of White's strategy is evident now. While executing his plan, he coincidentally thwarts his opponent's concept. This eliminates the threat of Black Knight advancing to f6. So, after knight h5, and having the knight on h5 serves as a benefit as it guards the f4 pawn. This allows the rook on f1 to join the attack and enables the maneuver like knight f3 and then knight e5. Black won't be able to counter with bishop takes f4 because the knight on h5 is supporting it. So after knight h5, now black played queen f7, attacking the h5 knight so that if white plays knight f3 or rook f3, black can capture the knight. Now white played a good move, rook f3. Strategical plans must consider tactics. White attack gets stronger because they've calculated if queen takes h5, then rook g3 check, which moves this move wins the queen from a surprise attack by the white queen. So it's a discovered attack. This is the decisive moment in the game. Black's recent move wastes time, leading to a weakening position. In hindsight, king h8. King h8 instead of queen f7. Would have been better, keeping the black queen guarding the bishop on d6 and the knight on c7 as well as the square on c6. So that the white rook cannot enter. Would have been better. So black played queen f7 and then white played the good move rook f3. King h8. The king shifts away from the g file, making queen takes h5 a genuine threat right now because there will be no check when the rook comes over here. However, it becomes evident that the king is not secure on h8. Rook h3. Adams positions a third piece towards the board's edge, once again aiming to reinforce his hold over the center. He intends to bring back the knight on h4 to the center. This way, once the knight moves to f3, his rook can safeguard the other knight on h5, relieving the queen of this duty. Simultaneously, the rook poses a threat to h7, combining with potential future moves like knight g5 or knight f6. These threats can disrupt black's control over these squares. It is important to note that Adams can execute these moves due to the static situation in the center. The pawns are locked in place, preventing black from launching a sudden attack while white's pieces are engaged in deliberate maneuvers on the king side. So rook g8, black played rook g8. The disharmony in black's side is clear. The rook must contest for the g file. Yet its position on g8 limits the defensive options as it blocks the king from using the square for a potential escape. Knight f3. The knight happily comes back to f3, excited about the fresh attacking opportunities that have emerged on e5 and g5. Queen e7. Black spends extra time moving his queen to prevent being targeted by knight g5. If he had attempted to defend his king with knight e8, this sequence would have been occurred. Knight g5, queen d7, knight takes h7, a good move. Consequently, the black king would lose its protection, pawn protection, leading to blacks sacrificing their queen, either with king takes h7, then knight f6 check, loses the queen, or queen takes h7, then knight g3, still losing the queen. So after knight f3, queen e7. Queen e2. Immediately playing knight e5 would allow black chances to rescue the game. Bishop takes a5, f takes e5, knight e8. The e5 square is blocked and the e6 pawn becomes safe from direct attacks. So Adams chooses a pawn, a calm yet lethal preparatory move, the main move, queen e2. White intends to position the knight on the powerful e5 square like this. So if after knight e5, if black captures on e5 with the bishop, white can retake with the queen. This move not only recaptures the piece but also deals a fatal check onto the black king, which has no escape route. Black has to block with the rook and the knight will capture it. So after queen e2, black played knight e8. This knight has had a miserable performance. It exemplifies Tarash's statement that if one piece is poorly placed, the entire game suffers. Rook c6. Adams continues to mount unrelenting pressure on all the sides of the board. The black bishop becomes a vulnerable target as moving it would lead to follow-up capture on e6. Queen d7. If instead knight f6, then knight takes knight, queen takes knight, rook takes bishop, white gains a piece. And instead of queen d7, if black plays knight g7, rook takes bishop, queen takes rook, and then knight f6, followed by rook takes h7, and it's a checkmate. So after knight f6, if knight h5, then rook takes h5, the white rook proves its worth on the h file. So queen d7, knight e5. This powerful entrance is far superior to retreating the rook. If now bishop takes e5, then queen takes knight g7, knight f6, attacking queen, rook, and also threatening checkmate on h7. Queen takes rook and then checkmate. So after knight e5, black played queen e7. So now white played rook takes d6, the good move. This is the moment white removes the black piece that's strongly defending the dark squares and gains time to clear the path for the queen with the upcoming move. Black played knight takes d6. It was forced because if queen takes d6, then knight f7, it's a checkmate. So knight takes d6 and now white played knight c6, black resigned. Through an attack on the black queen, white secures a crucial move to exploit the e5 square. Benjamin doesn't wait to witness the successful check on e5, as after queen f8, queen e5 check, rook g7, knight takes rook, queen takes knight, and then queen takes d6, where he would be an entire knight behind without any compensation. So after knight c6, black resigned. So principles to keep in mind. Occupy the center with pawns, develop your pieces rapidly towards the center, develop knights before bishops, if possible, develop with a threat. Castle as early as possible. If opponent delays castling, break open the center lines to attack the king in the middle. When center pawn structure is static, then only attack from the side. I hope you liked the video as well. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share and subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video. Bye bye.